Today, McCain tried a new old tactic against Obama, claiming widespread voter fraud, hinting Obama's involvement, discussing recent accusations against ACORN, the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, a national network of community groups working on issues like voter registration, housing, minimum wage. McCain telling the Telemundo network that alleged voter registration fraud by ACORN employees, quote, deprives Americans of their most precious right. I am very worried about it, and I am worried about Senator Obama's connections with ACORN. Specifically in Nevada, ACORN submitted voter registration forms including names of non-residents like Tony Romo, who happens to be the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, although there's been very little evidence of that the last 3 weeks. Anyway, today Obama was asked about his ACORN connection.
First of all, my relationship to ACORN is pretty straightforward. It's probably 13 years ago, when I was still practicing law, I represented ACORN, and my partner in that representation was the U.S. Justice Department in having Illinois implement what was called the motor voter law.
That's right, the U.S. Justice Department, Obama's nefarious co-conspirator. In fact, the voter registration charges are not against ACORN, but against a handful of employees, part-timers hired by the dozens to sign up voters. ACORN not the perpetrator, but itself a victim, paying for real voter registrations and required by law to submit registration sheets in their entirety, even if they do contain bogus names.
My understanding, by the way, in terms of the voter fraud, because having run a voter registration drive, I know how problems arise. This is typically a situation where ACORN probably paid people to get registrations, and these folks, not wanting to actually register people because that's actually hard work, just went into a phone book or made up names and submitted false registrations to get paid. So there's been fraud perpetrated on probably ACORN if they paid these individuals and they actually didn't do registrations. But this isn't a situation where there is actually people who are going to try to vote because these are phony names. And you know, it's doubtful that Tony Romo is going to show up in Ohio to vote.
Well, he's not busy doing any quarterbacking. Even though non-existent voters obviously cannot vote, McCain's tactic, not a new one. For the past several election cycles, Karl Rove and other GOP insiders have used trumped-up claims of widespread voter registration fraud to imply widespread voter fraud and justify clampdowns and laws that let them purge thousands of real voters from the rolls. Most of those fired U.S. attorneys having lost their jobs, in fact, after resisting White House pressure to pursue voter registration cases, despite Justice Department guidelines against filing such charges during election run-ups because it smacks of, gosh, politics. Fired prosecutor David Iglesias later revealing that even the Justice Department knew those cases were bogus. In fact, while McCain loudly implies some sinister meaning to Obama's ACORN ties of 13 years ago, Mark Ambinder of The Atlantic reporting today that McCain's campaign secretly asked the Montana GOP in vain to stop its current attempt to purge thousands of voters from the rolls. And one of McCain's own ties to ACORN, not 13 years ago, but 2 years ago. McCain was the keynote speaker at a rally co-sponsored by ACORN. In a tape obtained by Ambinder, a speaker identifies ACORN as a sponsor, and ACORN's red-shirted members are seen in great number, and McCain is heard giving ACORN hell for their nefarious deeds.
What makes America special is what's in this room tonight. That's what makes America special.
That's telling him. According to Ambinder, McCain chief counsel Trevor Potter argued this spring against using the GOP's old voter fraud claims this year because in 2004 and 2006, they backfired. Let's turn now to former GOP operative Allen Raymond, who did time for trying to suppress the 2002 New Hampshire vote and wrote about it in How to Rig an Election, Confessions of a Republican Operative. Thanks again for joining us tonight, Allen.
You're welcome, Keith.
Assess this McCain claim here for us. Made up names on voter registration sheets. Is it a threat to democracy, or is it just a Republican talking point?
No, it's a talking point, and it's a ruse, and frankly, it's irresponsible. This type of thing happens all the time. It's not systemic. The reason it's happening is because these folks who are circulating petitions to get people registered are paid by a quota. And frankly, you know, a lot of these folks are the unemployable. I've hired them to do ballot access petitions. And oftentimes what you're going to find is that they're going to submit a lot of names because that's how they get their paycheck.
What is the purpose, do you think, of putting this out, this talking point out for McCain and in general for the Republicans?
Well, it's a diversion from the economy. And frankly, there's an element of this that speaks to racial politicking, and that's the linkage between ACORN and the subprime meltdown, linking ACORN to its lobbying on behalf of the Community Reinvestment Act. So there's an element of racial politicking here, but mostly what it is it's anything to stop talking about the economy. So let's talk about voter fraud. It sows some fear. It gins up the base. And its intent is to potentially maybe sway some undecided voters in swing states.
But what we've got also in here, inside these accusations and throwing around these names and throwing around connections between ACORN and Obama, is you've got the merger of these two concepts that are totally different things. Voter fraud rather than voter registration fraud. Are McCain and Palin uninformed about this, or are they essentially lying to their own supporters about what's actually going on here?
Well, it's spin, it's rhetoric. I mean, you're right. As Senator Obama pointed out, the front line for the Dallas Cowboys is not showing up in Nevada to vote on Election Day. These are simply, as I said earlier, these are people who are looking to get paid for doing work, and frankly, they're looking to make more money than for the work that they did. So, are they uninformed? I doubt it. I think that it's just a deliberate turning away from the facts and just using it as a way to gin up some fear.
Give me a moment's thought on, apart from registration fraud and voter fraud, how voter suppression works, this Montana example as an example, and where it ranks in terms of actual threats to democracy.
Well, again, I mean, what are we talking about, threats to democracy? I think that what you need to look for is systemic efforts to suppress votes. And where you find those is, for instance, in 1981 in New Jersey, where the Republican Party hired off-duty police officers to stand in urban polling places with their sidearms clearly visible with the intent to scare off voters. So I think you need to be more worried about those things than you do about people trying to slip in some false registrations because they want to make a few more dollars. Although
at least the Dallas Cowboys fans would like to know where Tony Romo is if he's neither in Nevada nor in Dallas. Allen Raymond, the author of How to Rig an Election, thank you again for your time, sir.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.